Nicodemus here. On today's episode, I wanted to jump into what do you do when you've made a mistake and you can't just you can't stop replaying it over and over and over in your mind and you're beating yourself up.
This is we probably all can relate to have gone through this at one point, and there's a lot of different ways to address it or look at it. The first thing is the obsessiveness of our thinking. If I make what I deem to be a mistake and I can't stop thinking about it, I've already judged the situation as bad. Now that contradicts what Jesus says in the Course is all things work together for good. There's no exception to this except in the ego's plan and the ego's curriculum. And what the ego does is it raises control rather than sanity to predominance. So when we're obsessing about an error, what we're attempting to do is control the situation and the future outcomes, even though we don't know what they are and what the best outcome can be. There's one of the lessons says, I do not perceive my own best interest. So what Jesus says to us in the lessons is that in no situation do you or I ever know what's in our own best interest. So if I can't stop obsessing about a situation, I've already judged that it's bad and that the situation itself is not in my best interest, or at least the way it's playing out. That judgment alone now has me in separation, has me ultimately in hell, and you feel hellish. You could probably all think of an example in your own life when something really, this is bad. Even though the ego always convinces us that this problem is the big problem. I'll share with you a quick story. I've asked this question for over a decade. So at this point now, thousands and thousands of students. And the answer is usually always the same. And I ask them, I say, raise your hand if one of the worst things that ever happened to you turned out to be one of the best things. And invariably, almost everyone raises their hand. Well, why is that? And what does that show us? Well, it shows us first that our judgment on a situation in the moment is very often wrong. Now, if we made a mistake, let's say I chose something and I did something and it really, it just didn't work out, or I really feel like it was an error. All errors are easily correctable by the Holy Spirit. And if you start to look at all these situations where things seem to go bad, every single one of them gives us an opportunity to come back to God, which makes in itself a gem in every single situation. And actually our job is to find it. When I say the gem, what the gem is if the situation that appears to be really bad or really a massive error, if it brings me back to God, then it was a blessing. Now I'll read some things from the Course that Jesus says, and this is important for us because if I have something that's happening in my life where I feel like pain showed up or static showed up in my body, in my being, or I feel like I'm suffering as a result of it, somehow I'm disconnected from God. I'm out of direct communion or communication with God. Because when I am in alignment with the Holy Spirit, everything is actually to my benefit and my advantage in the end. That's what Jesus says. He says, we do not perceive our own best interest, but in every situation, we can be taught what's in our own best interest. And what's in our own best interest is every single one of these appearances ultimately giving us if you want to call it the secret to find God again. So let me read you something. This is from chapter 7, section 11, the state of grace. It says, grace is the natural state of every son of God. That's you and me. Now, remember that the son of God, it's used in the masculine. The Course is written in a lot of Shakespearean language. Helen loves Shakespeare. So you could change that for you, daughter of God. So grace is the natural state of every son of God when he is not in a state of grace. And think about this. If I'm ever in static, ever in pain or suffering, I'm not in a state of grace. Not that the grace isn't available to me, but I've disconnected from it. When he is not in a state of grace, he is out of his natural environment and does not function well. Everything he does becomes a strain because he was not created for the environment that he has made. He therefore cannot adapt to it, nor can he adapt it to him. There is no point in trying. A son of God is happy only when he knows he is with God. That is the only environment in which he will not experience strain because that is where he belongs. It's also the only environment that's worthy of him because his own worth is beyond anything he can make. So anyone for you in your own life, if you're struggling with something specific, a specific situation, and you feel like you're in strain, what Jesus is teaching us is that our minds get to correct, that the strain is not because of the situation, but the strain is because my disconnection from God, which is my natural environment, and the only thing that will actually give me the ability to transcend any strain. So that's the first thing for us to remember. So for some of you, maybe you feel like it's not just one situation. Maybe you feel like multiple situations, maybe at work, maybe in an intimate relationship. Maybe it's a business deal that you thought was going to go through and it didn't. And now you feel like you've lost, or you feel like maybe scarcity has creeped into your thoughts. All of them, remember, all of them are always one problem and one solution. And every single appearance that appears to be a problem, it's always the same one problem, which is the belief that I can be separate from God, which takes me out of grace in my natural state. And the solution is that I can never be separate from God, but I need to change my mind to think with the Holy Spirit. Now, that might seem difficult at first, but what Jesus says in the Course is it's much easier to think with God than to think against God. So if you're experiencing strain in one area or multiple areas in your life, that's a signal that we've been listening to the ego's doctrine. That's why we're in strain. So we're out of grace. What's the solution is grace. And how does grace isn't something that's given to us. It's always there, but we can't experience it or feel it if our minds are thinking in scarcity, in thinking in the ego's doctrine. So that's the first thing I wanted to read to you. And the next thing I wanted to read to you actually comes from really what Jesus is saying is that, let me pull this part up. This is very important. This is in chapter 8, and it's very important for us to understand this because what we're doing is we're revamping our entire thought system and how we learn to see the world and everything in it. Now, for some of you, it's going to feel like that's a long undoing process, and that's okay. That's what life is actually for. So if something is really intense, also know that the more intense it feels for you, the greater the opportunity to reconnect to God and actually have that miracle, which can in proportion transform your life and your experience. Now in chapter 8, section 1, paragraph 5, what Jesus says is the curriculum of the atonement or the healing is the opposite of the curriculum you've established for yourself, but so is its outcome. If the outcome of your curriculum has made you unhappy, and if you want a different one, a change in the curriculum is obviously necessary. Now, most of us don't experience what appears to be, serious problems or when things don't go our way. We don't experience that as an opportunity of changing the curriculum. But a change of curriculum is necessary because how do we know? Look at the result. It ended in pain and static for us. He goes on, he says, if the outcome of your curriculum has made you unhappy, and if you want a different one, a change in the curriculum is obviously necessary. The first change to be introduced is a change in direction. A meaningful curriculum cannot be inconsistent. So if we're going to change the curriculum, it cannot be inconsistent. So we cannot vacillate between listening to the Holy Spirit sometimes and listen to the ego at other times and think we're going to find the grace and the peace that has been given us. He goes on and says, a meaningful curriculum cannot be inconsistent. If it is planned by two teachers, each believing in diametrically opposed ideas, it cannot be integrated. And who are the two teachers? There's only two teachers in our thoughts, the Holy Spirit and the ego, and they're teaching us entirely different things. If you're struggling with something and you feel, if you've ever gotten that, and I've had many times in my life, that pit in your stomach feeling of like, it takes your breath away, a changing curriculum is necessary. And it shows us that we chose the wrong teacher because it didn't give us the result that we want, which is peace, joy, abundance, freedom. He goes, it cannot be integrated. If it's carried out by these two teachers simultaneously, each one merely interferes with the other. This leads to fluctuation, but not to change. And what you'll see is most people, everybody has the voice of the Holy Spirit in their mind. But what they've learned to do is not to listen to it very often and listen to the ego more and more and more. which leads to more and more suffering and pain. He goes on and he says, the volatile have no direction. They cannot choose one because they cannot relinquish the other, even if it does not exist. What Jesus is saying is that all of the pain of the ego's thought system, it doesn't exist. It sells us on shadows, fear, false evidence appearing real. But what we're inconsistent in our choice. We want to choose the Holy Spirit when we want, when it feels really good. Maybe on Sunday, if you go to church or you read the course, like, yeah, I choose the Holy Spirit. But when it comes to this situation, like, I choose the ego's doctrine. And now I'm in pain and in the nightmare. He says they cannot choose one because they cannot relinquish the other. So that's our biggest obstacle is we don't want to relinquish the ego's teaching and the ego's voice. Even though it speaks of hell and destruction to us, we still, it's like that old saying, the devil you know is better than the one you don't. We're like, well, we're used to that voice, so I'll keep choosing it. But actually, that voice must be relinquished more and more until it's relinquished entirely, and we only hear the voice of the Holy Spirit. He goes on, and he says, their conflicted curriculum teaches them that all directions exist. Like, and you see this now, like, everything goes, all directions exist. There's so many different directions to choose. That's not true. What Jesus says is there's only two. Don't ever try to complicate it. Our minds like to complicate it and think that there's so many different directions and so many different choices, but there's really only two. And we're choosing between the ego and the Holy Spirit, between the crucifixion and the resurrection, between hell and heaven every moment. He goes on, and I'll end with this. He says, both teachers, they are teaching you entirely different things in entirely different ways, which might be possible, except that both are teaching you about yourself. Your reality is unaffected by both teaching, meaning you've already been given your reality, which is the Christ consciousness, which is you as the Christ. So your reality is unaffected by whether you listen to the Holy Spirit or the ego. But, and this is a big but, your reality is unaffected by both. But if you listen to both teachers, meaning you vacillate between the Holy Spirit and the ego, your mind will be split about what your reality is. And now we're in hell. And now we're in pain and suffering. So this is really important. No matter what's happening in your life, no matter how dark you feel like the dark night of the soul is for you, you could be at the most rock bottom of your life. You still can change your mind about it. You still can change your mind to listen to the Holy Spirit and choose again. And now, if that is the lesson that you learn from this, it's the greatest blessing that you can ever have been bestowed upon you. So what appears to be a problem, what appears to be one of the worst things that ever happened to you, actually now turns out to be one of the best. And you'll start to realize more and more, as Jesus says, is that all things work together for good because all things give us the opportunity to come back to God.